Welcome to the Church Ready podcast. Expect honest conversations about solving today's ministry challenges while building tomorrow's resilience as AI reshapes the future church. Let's join your hosts, Bradley Willis and Elizabeth Carter, now.
I'm Bradley Willis.
And I'm Elizabeth Carter.
And you were listening to an episode of the Church Ready podcast. So to kick things off today, we are actually starting with a very specific scenario.
Right. It's a very real one, too.
Yeah, I want you to picture this vividly because it is playing out right now, tonight, in towns and cities all over the country. Imagine a 19-year-old college freshman.
First time away from home.
Exactly. She's away from her hometown, her family, and crucially, her home church for the very first time. It's late, maybe midnight, maybe 1 a.m, and she is sitting there in the glow of her laptop in a quiet dorm room, and she's grappling with this, profound, heavy question.
The kind of question that really keeps you up at night.
Yeah, totally. Maybe she's trying to reconcile the theology she grew up with against a really complex argument she just learned in an ethics class. And she's feeling that acute, terrifying sense of, I guess you'd call it spiritual vertigo.
Oh, wow, yeah. Spiritual vertigo is a great way to describe it.
Right. The floor is dropping up from under her, and she is desperately looking for an anchor. But here is the critical part of the story. When she reaches for a lifeline, she doesn't call the youth worker who mentored her for 4 years.
No, of course not.
Right? She doesn't text her pastor from back home. Instead, she picks up her phone, opens an AI app, and types in her most deeply vulnerable, worldview-shaking questions. And within 3 seconds, she gets a response.
And it's not what we used to get, right?
No, it isn't a clunky, robotic regurgitation of a search engine. It is thoughtful. It speaks with this empathetic cadence. It's theologically nuanced. And it is highly personalized to exactly the anxiety she's feeling in that exact moment.
It's just wild. I mean, it is a scenario that completely redefines the landscape of spiritual formation for an entire generation. What we are examining in this episode is the existing and, frankly, long-standing discipleship gap in the church.
The gap where young people show up spiritually curious but don't stay long enough to actually become rooted.
Exactly. And we're looking at how artificial intelligence is actively stepping into that void as an alternative formation authority. I mean, for at least 2 decades, pastors have been living with this discipleship gap.
Oh, for sure.
The question of how to form a generation that is deeply skeptical of institutions, I mean, that's not new. It is exhausting. It is largely unresolved. And it's sitting on the agenda of nearly every leadership team in local church ministry today. But AI has fundamentally changed the physics of the problem.
It really has. And I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a second. Think about your own congregation. Think about the young adults who grew up in your youth group, or maybe the new faces sitting in your back pews on a Sunday.
Yeah, picture them.
If one of them had a serious crisis-level theological question at midnight, what would actually make them reach for you rather than an AI app? That is the driving mission of this episode. We are looking at what happens when the algorithm knows their name and what the church must do in response to build genuine resilience.
Right. And to really grasp the magnitude of this shift, we have to look at the macro level reality facing those leadership teams. Because that single story of the 19-year-old in her dorm room, that is playing out at an unbelievable scale. And we actually now have the numbers to prove it.
The new Barna data, right?
Yes. The new Barna data from early 2026 paints a picture that should completely recalibrate how we think about ministry. According to this research, nearly 1 in 3 U.S. adults now say they trust spiritual advice from AI just as much as they trust advice from a pastor.
Wait, 1 in 3 adults? That is, that's a massive portion of the population substituting pastoral care with predictive text.
It is. It's staggering. And when we drill down specifically into Gen Z and millennials, that number actually jumps to 2 in 5.
Wow.
Yeah. 4 out of 10 young adults see absolutely no meaningful difference between the theological guidance of a trained local pastor, someone who can actually know them, look them in the eye, share a physical space with them, and the output of a machine learning system.
An algorithm that has never met them, never wept with them, never prayed for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is not just a passing trend. That is a full-blown formation crisis that the church needs to name and address with absolute urgency.
Essentially, we've entered an era of WebMD for theology.
Yeah.
But it's far more profound because instead of just diagnosing a physical symptom like a sore throat, the algorithm is actually prescribing a worldview, right?
That's exactly what it's doing.
It is defining meaning, purpose, and morality.
Yeah.
But I have to push back a little on the underlying motivation here.
Okay, let's hear it.
Are young people choosing AI because they inherently distrust the church as an institution? Or is it simply a matter of, human nature in the 21st century where convenience always wins the default choice?
That's a really good question.
All right. I mean, we live in a world where friction has been aggressively engineered out of every other aspect of their lives, from how they order food to how they date. Why would we expect their approach to a spiritual crisis to be any different?
See, that is exactly the right lens to view this through. As we noted, pastors and youth workers have been dealing with a generation deeply skeptical of institutions for at least 20 years. The distrust is real, but AI adds a completely new dimension to that distrust by basically weaponizing convenience.
Weaponizing convenience. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, because think about the sheer amount of psychological friction involved in calling a pastor. You have to admit out loud that you are struggling. You have to be vulnerable. You have to risk judgment, or at least
The perceived feeling of being judged.
Exactly. You have to coordinate schedules, sit in a brightly lit office, and allow yourself to be seen in a real moment of weakness.
Right. It takes immense courage to look another human being in the eye and say, I am having a crisis of faith, and I don't know if I believe any of this anymore.
It really does.
Plus, let's be honest, there's the social fiction. You might be worried that the youth pastor is going to follow up with you constantly or try to rope you into volunteering at the church car wash when you just wanted an answer to a question.
Yeah. Right. The human relationship comes with expectations. But the AI requires zero vulnerability. It requires absolutely no commitment. There is no relationship to manage, no awkward pauses, and absolutely no follow-up questions you don't want to answer.
You just close the app.
You confess your deepest doubts, the AI validates you instantaneously, and then you close the app and it's gone. It is radically, frictionlessly convenient. And when you combine a pre-existing distrust of institutions with a perfectly frictionless alternative, convenience absolutely wins the default choice.
So if we follow that logic to its natural conclusion, if AI is radically convenient and young people are already skeptical of the traditional church model, we would expect them to just abandon the physical church entirely, right?
You'd think so, yes.
They have their custom AI guru in their pocket, available 24/7, so why bother waking up on a Sunday morning and dealing with parking lots and crowds? But the data actually shows the exact opposite, which is incredibly counterintuitive.
Yes, and this is the fascinating paradox of this whole cultural moment. Gen Z is actually attending church at the highest frequency that Barna has tracked for young believers.
Really?
Yeah, they are averaging 1.9 weekends per month. They are not checking out of the physical building. They are showing up.
Almost 2 weekends a month. I mean, for a demographic that every cultural commentator says is walking away from faith, that is a huge retention rate.
It's huge. And their motivations are intensely real and incredibly raw. They are being driven to the church by very real anxieties, crushing mental health struggles, economic instability, job loss, and just the general overwhelming pressure of modern digital life.
They're looking for an escape from all that.
They are genuinely seeking peace. They even report believing that a widespread spiritual revival is coming. They want something real, something transcendent. But here is the massive disconnect.
Right.
Despite this rising physical attendance, all the long-term formation indicators are flatlining.
So they are in the seats, they are listening to the music, they are taking in the message, but they aren't integrating it. They are consuming the Sunday morning experience, almost like a live-action Netflix documentary about spirituality.
Yes. What a great way to put it.
But it isn't actually transforming how they live their lives on a Tuesday.
Precisely. The metrics that indicate a faith has actually taken root. Things like prioritizing faith in daily decision-making, maintaining consistent attendance over a span of years, or engaging in active community service and evangelism, those are totally stagnant. The attendance is spiking, but the rootedness is not.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why is that happening? Because as a pastor, if I hear that young people are showing up twice a month and they are openly searching for something real to combat their anxiety, my initial thought is, we've won half the battle.
Right. You'd think the hard part is over.
They are physically in the building. Why isn't that attendance translating into rootedness?
To understand why, we have to look at the psychological mechanics of what we might call the spiritual immune system. When your spiritual inputs are entirely curated to your comfort zone by an algorithm, when you can get all your theological questions answered without ever having to engage with another human being, your spiritual immune system severely weakens.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
You lose the muscle memory required to sit next to someone in a pew who votes differently than you. You lose the capacity to forgive someone in your small group who actually hurt your feelings. You lose the ability to be profoundly annoyed by a community member, but to choose to love them anyway. True discipleship was never meant to be a friction-free experience.
Wow, yeah. It is like feeding a child nothing but highly processed pureed food and then wondering why they can't chew a steak.
Exactly.
If their entire diet of spiritual inquiry is handled by a machine that always agrees with their premise and, never challenges their selfishness, they simply don't develop the relational muscles that real faith requires.
Exactly. AI offers a highly personalized version of spiritual consumption without the discomfort of being known. Discipleship, on the other hand, involves a community that expects something from you. It involves people who hold you accountable. When you substitute messy, beautiful, real-world community for a frictionless algorithm, you get curiosity without rootedness. You get attendance without actual formation.
So if friction and human messiness are exactly what they need to grow, but AI is providing a perfectly smooth, friction-free alternative, how does this actually play out for the future of the church? Because AI isn't just a search engine anymore.
No, not at all.
We aren't just talking about a tool that gives you a Wikipedia summary of the book of Romans. We are talking about a technology that speaks with authority.
And that brings us to a really critical concept, the existing discipleship gap. That exhausting struggle to move young adults from initial curiosity to deep rootedness that was already a smoldering fire in the church. The accelerant bridge is what happens when you introduce a technology that functions as an alternative formation authority right on top of that existing gap.
So explain the mechanics of that metaphor for us.
Yeah.
If it's a bridge, what exactly is it bridging?
It is a bridge because it spans the exact gap where a young believer historically had to seek out a human elder. In the past, if you had a crisis of faith, the gap between your question and your answer required you to traverse the messy river of human relationship. You had to go talk to someone.
You had to wade through the water.
Yes. AI builds a frictionless bridge right over that river, rushing the young person directly to a synthetic answer before they ever have to build a real human connection. And it does this instantaneously. It's available at any hour, requires no vulnerability, no commitment, and no relationship.
It just pours gasoline on the fire.
For a generation already skeptical of institutions, the convenience gap between AI and the church has never been wider. The flame, the struggle to move young adults from curiosity to rootedness was already burning. AI disruption is what is accelerating it by giving that generation a formation alternative that feels responsive, personalized, and safe.
Yeah, and we at Church Ready directly named this framework as the core issue. Because the church cannot compete on convenience. It can compete and win on presence. That is the formation conversation the church needs to be having now. The church's mission doesn't change because of AI, but the infrastructure that sustains that mission may need to. If you have never considered how AI disruptions will impact your congregation and church budget, the Church Resilience Assessment is the right next step. It only takes 10 minutes. There's a link in the show notes.
And competing on presence requires us to fundamentally shift our understanding of what we are actually offering. We have to recognize that spiritual formation isn't an information problem.
Right.
If the primary goal of the local church was just to dispense correct theological information and historical facts, then yes, an AI could eventually replace us and probably do a more efficient job of it. But formation is a presence problem. Look at the biblical mandate in Hebrews 10.
The stir up one another passage.
Exactly. The writer instructs the early church, and let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another.
I have always loved the physicality of that phrasing, stir up one another. It implies friction, it implies agitation.
Yes, agitation.
It is an active, physical, deeply relational process. You cannot be stirred up by something that doesn't actually exist in the physical world with you.
That is exactly the point. That passage in Hebrews is not a recommendation for a helpful app or a good daily devotional. It is a description of something chemical and spiritual that happens between people who are physically present to each other. An AI can give a 19-year-old a flawlessly accurate, theologically profound explanation of what love and good works are.
But it can't stir them.
Right. It cannot stir anyone toward them. Only a physical, present community can do that. The church's irreplaceable offering is not information. It is presence formation that happens in real time, through real relationships, in real community.
So we are talking about the difference between competence and incarnation. That makes total sense. Competence, the ability to aggregate data, synthesize theology, and output a correct answer, that scales infinitely on a server farm.
Perfectly said.
But incarnation, the willingness to physically sit with someone in their pain, to share their space, to look them in the eye, that requires a physical body in a specific room. An algorithm can only ever offer competence. It fundamentally cannot offer incarnation.
Exactly. When a pastor sits in a hospital waiting room with a grieving family or walks with a young adult through a devastating crisis of faith over a cup of coffee, they are bringing the physical presence of Christ. The tensure of that shared human experience, the shared silence, the empathy that doesn't need words, that is incarnation. The church that understands that profound difference and builds its formation infrastructure around it will be the church the next generation actually needs.
Okay, but if incarnation is the only thing an algorithm cannot replicate, then how does a church actually operationalize incarnation on a Tuesday night? What does that infrastructure look like? Because we can't just diagnose the technological problem. We have to actually build the solution.
We call this posture visionary stewardship. Pastors who build genuine formation culture now are not choosing between fixing today's discipleship gap and preparing for tomorrow's AI challenge. They aren't running two separate playbooks. The exact same infrastructure addresses both. The solution to the AI disruption is actually a radical return to the deepest, most authentic, burden-bearing roots of the early church.
And I want to challenge you, the listener, to evaluate your current ministries through this exact lens. What does your current discipleship process actually produce?
That's the tough question.
It really is. Are you just creating informed attenders, people who know all the right answers, who consume the sermon content and then go home to live isolated lives? Or are people being actively formed through genuine community? Look at your small groups. Are they producing the kind of mutual care and fierce accountability that makes real belonging feel entirely different from frictionless digital engagement?
Because if they aren't.
Right, because if your small group just sits in a circle and exchanges facts about a Bible passage, an AI can facilitate that exchange faster and better.
That is the hard truth of visionary stewardship. Building this formation culture means taking a very critical look at our programming. It means moving small groups beyond surface-level study into actual burden-bearing. It requires establishing intentional mentoring relationships pairing experienced, rooted believers with these spiritually curious, biblically thin young adults who are showing up 1.9 times a month.
It means creating spaces where it is safe to be completely known, flaws and all.
Yes. And it has to change how we preach, too. It means our teaching from the pulpit has to actively engage the questions a post-AI world is generating. We cannot just preach as if the technological landscape hasn't fundamentally altered how our congregations view reality, work, and relationships.
Absolutely. The pulpit must address the existential dread this technology creates. What does it actually mean to be human when machines can write our poetry, code our software, and answer our theological questions?
What is the theological value of human limitation?
Exactly. What is the divine purpose of friction and inefficiency in our relationships? The church must have a prophetic voice on these issues.
Because those are not abstract philosophical questions for a seminary classroom anymore. Those are the exact practical questions that the 19-year-old freshman is encountering as she stares at her laptop. And if we don't have a robust, embodied, incarnational answer for her, she will absolutely settle for the synthetic answer in her pocket.
And that is why we must act now. The 19-year-old typing her questions into an app at midnight is the exact same person who will either find a church that can hold her, that can bear the weight of her questions and her anxiety, or she will decide she already has everything she needs right there in her hand.
That is exactly what's at stake.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought to wrestle with, something that pushes this even further. We have spent this entire episode talking about the spiritual vulnerability of the young congregant. But as AI gets exponentially better at mimicking empathy, what happens when it is not just the 19-year-old college student using it?
Oh, this is a heavy thought.
It really is. What happens when a burned-out, exhausted pastor, someone who is stretched too thin and overwhelmed by the demands of ministry, starts using that same AI to outline and write their weekly sermons on suffering? If the messenger isn't physically, emotionally, and spiritually present to the pain they are preaching about, if the sermon is competent but lacks incarnation, does the message still carry weight? Or does the congregation subconsciously realize they are just being fed a highly polished synthetic product? Think about what that does to the spiritual immune system of an entire church.
At Church Ready, we help you solve the very real challenges you're facing today to build tomorrow's resilience. You don't have to choose. Until next time, lead well, steward wisely, and trust deeply.
The church's mission doesn't change because of AI, but the infrastructure that sustains that mission may need to. If you have never considered how AI disruptions will impact your congregation and church budget, the Church Resilience Assessment is the right next step. It only takes 10 minutes. There is a link in the show notes.